In the depths of the woods, a woman was completely isolated from society and people. However, one day, she summoned the courage to leave the darkness of the woods and embark on a journey to explore the world. In the city, she encountered a tall, striking man who promised to fulfill all her desires and provide unconditional love and protection. The woman, being innocent and naive, believed his words. One beautiful day, the man led her to an undisclosed location, claiming it was a surprise. However, what awaited her was a nightmare. The place was overrun with monsters that feasted on women. The woman was about to meet the same fate, but something magical made them vanish, and the girl was saved from the clutches of death. Detective Dan greeted me with a question as soon as I emerged from the interrogation room. "Is she still harping about that monster story?" he asked. "Unfortunately, she is, but I'm convinced that she's not involved in the homicides. Rather, I believe she's a victim." I replied in the affirmative, with a tinge of regret. I returned to my desk and reopened her file, determined to find clues supporting my theory. However, Detective Dan remained doubtful. "I'm not sure, Dahlia. I have a hunch that there's something we're not seeing." The crease in his forehead deepened as he began to focus his thoughts. The girl we were talking about was Patricia. A 911 call was made a few days ago from the part of town with the most criminal activities. Cops found her naked, unconscious, and covered in blood, while 4 men who were past convicts of several crimes were found dead. Their body was poorly mutilated, along with several missing parts. The most confusing part was that all their DNA was found on each other, including the girls, and there were traces of them forcing themselves on her. Where Detective Dan had the theory that she might have been among the murders, I don't believe such a thin and scrawny girl would be able to kill those while being forced. She also seemed to suffer from mental trauma and some delusion disorder, where her brain is fixed on the monster story. She must have seen them as monsters when forced by them. It was confirmed that her family lived in an old house in an isolated place surrounded by woods. Here in Maine, this was common. Some people preferred to live like that, so it was possible her parents raised her there and didn't let her go outside as she claimed. But I didn't understand why the house was empty, where Patricia claimed she had an older sister and her father living there. We tried to track them down, but we could never find them. I began to think her monster story might have some clues. If she had forgotten about the part where those men were murdered, all I had to do was find a way for her to remember. But there was a chance she might have gotten unconscious before the incident. In that case, it would be challenging to find the culprit. Whatever the case, we cannot let an innocent girl fall for something she doesn't even know about when she is the victim. I began working day and night to discover what happened when Detective Dan asked me to come with him to Patricia's house one day. "But don't you think we should look into the crime scene and try to find the culprit instead of digging into the victim?" I asked him. "Tell me, Dahlia, don't you find it weird that her family has disappeared without a trace and there is no missing person report? And we did find her DNA on the bodies." He was right, and he also had more experience than me. But I don't know why my heart did not want to believe she would do something like this. I mean, she looked so innocent. I followed him to Patricia's house, and we searched for clues about her family's disappearance. I was still wondering why we were trying to dig up something that wasn't even related to the case, but Dan's hunch had been proven correct on most of the cases, which later helped solve the issue, so I was sure about this time. "Dahlia, come here. Take a look at this." I followed his voice and found him standing near a flower field, but for some reason, The ground looked as if someone had dug it and buried something. There were large bumps in a few places, while the rest of the land seemed perfectly even. I went into the house and found a shovel. Dan then started digging at the uneven ground, and it wasn't long before the shovel hit something hard. He started digging around it faster, and we were left horrified at what was buried there. There were decomposing body parts of a man, which seemed to be cut into pieces. We immediately called for backup, and the body parts were taken for forensic tests. I didn't want to believe it, but it seemed someone had brutally murdered Patricia's family, and the only person who could have done that was Patricia herself. Is that why she escaped from her house? Because she killed her own family. But how? She looks so fragile. The case has become more complex, and we have no evidence against her. The only thing we could do was make her confess, but whatever technique I tried to use only failed. That was when Detective Dan said he would like to try this, and I agreed. He started questioning why she had left her home, and she started repeating the same monster story. He then tried to act as if he believed in it and began to ask questions about the story and her protagonist, which we thought Patricia was herself. He started making her comfortable using the raid technique, so she would let her guard down around him. I also tried to use this technique on her, but since she would keep repeating the same story repeatedly, it failed each time. Dan's approach was different. He was trying to figure out why the woman in the story left the woods, so Patricia started to give the answers we were searching for. The woman wasn't willingly isolated from society. She was forced to stay locked in the house by two monsters disguised as their family members. One day, those monsters were torturing her over something when she suddenly became enraged, grabbed the kitchen knife, and stabbed them. When she realized she had killed them, she started panicking and eating them to make the bodies disappear. But when she couldn't, she buried the bodies in the flower field and escaped. Her story after that was the same monster story that she had been repeating, but clearly she killed those men too, just like her family. It was later diagnosed that she had schizophrenia and delusional disorder, and instead of sending her to prison, she was ordered to be held in an asylum until her mental state improved. I learned something very important from that case. Being physically strong or weak had nothing to do with monstrosity, and I'm learning more with the cases we get, and I find myself lucky to be acquainted with someone like Detective Dan.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Who's up for some spine-tingling campfire tales? I asked the group, but Spencer visibly recoiled at the suggestion. I think I'll turn in for the night, he replied, promptly rising from his seat and heading towards his tent. But Abigail wasn't having it. Oh, no, you don't. You're going to share a story first, she declared, playfully latching onto his arms and drawing him back to his spot. The rest of us chuckled at her antics. Spencer's unease was palpable as he revealed his reluctance. You guys don't understand, he said, his voice faltering. My grandmother used to tell me that whenever you tell ghost stories around a campfire, a creature known as the Story Eater appears and kills everyone. I don't want to be a part of this. In an instant, Frederick uttered a piercing shriek and frantically gestured towards Spencer's back, stumbling over his words as he spoke. Story Eater. Abigail, Spencer, and I were caught off guard, and our bodies instinctively jolted in unison with his sudden outburst. As we spun around to face the source of his terror, nothing was visible to the naked eye. However, our ears picked up on his and Kevin's boisterous laughter, and just as I was about to speak up, I caught a glimpse of the creature lurking behind them. I attempted to alert the others by pointing and raising my voice, but a lump formed in my throat, and my words got stuck. Thinking I was doing the same thing, they laughed before Kevin said, "We are not going to fall for..." Kevin swallowed his words as they felt something sharp on their necks and turned around only to see a terrifying man smirking as he looked at us. He held 2 sharp knives to their throat. His appearance was so horrifying that I couldn't even look at him again. It looked like someone had sewed his left eye with thick threads, and the other was unbelievably big and round, looking straight at us. "Did I hear someone say campfire stories?" His terrifying voice made us shudder from horror. I gulped as I could feel cold sweat beads forming on my forehead. Now, don't be scared. You won't die if you tell the tale." His voice pierced through my ears, making me shake profoundly, while others were in the same state as me, as we all sat there frozen with fear. Spencer looked at me, and I could feel him say, "I warned you, didn't I?" "Tell," he shouted at us, making us even more scared than we already were. I'll tell," Kevin stuttered a reply before he started sharing. He then started telling the famous story about the Bedouin nomadic girl who lived with her tribe, and a ghoul fell in love with her. So, to be with her ghoul, he impersonated a human and started following her around until the girl noticed that he was a ghoul and not a human. The girl's aunt was a famous, influential woman in the tribe, so she convinced others to keep her niece safe, and they moved at night. But when they woke up the next morning, they realized the ghoul followed the girl even there, hiding in a pile of woods. The girl tried to run away from him, throwing her belongings at him to keep him at bay. He retreated for a while, but eventually returned and ate her heart. "Interesting, but not good enough." After saying that, he swung the knife at Kevin's neck and cut it away from his body, making all of us scream in horror. He then laughed maniacally and asked Frederick to tell another tale. He was so shocked and shaking that he couldn't utter a word and continued stuttering, irritating the monster. He stabbed Frederick in the neck as he looked at Abigail and me. After looking at what he did to Kevin, I couldn't think of any story that could satisfy him. My heart was racing so much I feared it would jump out of my throat, and I was sweating like crazy. I know others were just as scared as me, but we had nothing that could save us from his monstrosity. We would die even if we tell the story. I didn't think we had any option from the beginning. I turned to see Abigail, who volunteered to tell another tale. She was trembling from head to toe as she started to tell the story of a woman whose house was west of the moon. If someone lost their way to the moon, she would lure them into her house, promising the weary travelers a good rest. She would then try to make them laugh, and if they did, she would jump at them. She would gut them with her knife and take out their liver and intestines to eat it. The only way they could escape her clutches was to eat their guts before she could get a chance to cook them. That way, their innards would return to their bodies. Her house is still said to be seen occasionally, and she still lures wanderers and eats their guts. The moment she finished her story, the monster of a man started laughing. Still, before he could do anything, Spencer spoke. "I want to tell a story, but nothing can be scarier than tonight when a man suddenly appeared and killed 2 of our friends in front of our own eyes." His voice was shaking as he said that. I don't know what he was thinking, but I heard the monster's laugh grow louder, only fading into oblivion. I lifted my gaze to see why it was so quiet, and he was gone. Suddenly, Abigail started shaking me while calling out my name loudly while I looked at her in confusion. I blinked only to find myself surrounded by everyone, including Kevin and Frederick, whom I saw die before my eyes. "What happened? You suddenly passed out," Frederick asked. I jolted up and looked around. That story eater was nowhere to be seen. I looked at Spencer, who seemed quiet, and said, "I think we should turn in for the night. I'm sure everyone is tired." They all nodded their heads before heading to the tents.
This experience took place 4 years ago, after my time at the all-boys school, and I was back in Boston. I was 20 years old, and I was gearing up to go off to college in another state. Before I left, I made it a priority to spend as much time with my friends before our respective journeys into college life tripped us apart, and they always tend to. A friend of mine invited all of us high school friends to a bonfire in the Leominster, Massachusetts. For those of you who have never been to Leominster, it is basically the countryside of Massachusetts, where farming life and skiing resorts are plentiful. My friend, we will call him Chase, family owned a plot of land out there in the countryside that has been in his family since the early 1920s. I was excited to go because I used to live out there when I was very young, about 5 years old, and haven't been out there since then. A few other friends, we will call Kendrick, Sophie, Talia, and Kane, decided to carpool up there. Since Talia and her mom own a minivan that she scored for us to travel in for that weekend, about 15 minutes away from our location, Kane asked Talia to pull over in a liquor store to buy some drinks. Keep in mind, some of us were only 18 to 20 years old, but Kane just turned 21, so obviously we stayed in the car well. He went in to get the drinks. My excitement went up another level as up until this point. I never had alcohol before, and this will be the first time after Kane returned with drinks. Talia drove us the rest of the way to Chase's place. When we arrived there, it was just about sunset, and Chase was standing outside waiting for us with his arms extended, and that gesture of what took you so long to hit parked, and we poured out of the van. His cane showed up, chased the alcohol, and Chase's frustration quickly shifted to a smile, as if all things were forgiven. Chase ushered us to the back of the home, saying that we had already started barbecuing and food was practically done and getting cold. Later, as it was dark outside now, and my friends now were sitting around this bonfire, which was stacked with broken pieces of the family barn that was located a few yards from the actual house, with hay used as kindling, laughing and carrying on about high school memories. I was on my second beer at this point, drinking slowly as I didn't want to get drunk, as this was my first time drinking and I was afraid I'd pass out and miss the festivities. But I did have to pee. I announced I was going to take a leak. Chase reminded me to turn on the generator before heading in, so you can turn on the lights since this place lacked electricity for some reason. I assured him that I would as I stood up, but a sudden head rush overtook me. I was buzzed. I stumbled back. Kane laughed and called me a lightweight, and the rest of my friends laughed. I gave Kane the finger as I turned and started toward the house. Where it is, I was in the middle of the bonfire in the house. I felt compelled to look over at the dark barn. I don't know why, but I did. And I studied it for a moment. And just as my eyes were completing its scan of the barn, my eyes instantly were fixed and my jaw dropped. His panic took over me. Through the orange glow of the bonfire, illuminated the barn partially. Standing in the doorway of the barn, there was something standing there, staring at my friends, like this person was just glaring at them. At first, I thought it was one of my friends over at the barn, just wanted to check it out. So I looked back at my friends to see which one of them guys was over there. But all 5 friends were standing around the fire having good time. My eyes widened at this point, and I looked back over at the barn. And just when I did, the person who was once glaring at my friends was now glaring dead at me. He noticed I spotted him. I stood still in panic and shock because there was an intruder on my friend's property, and I needed to inform the others so we can run and get to safety and phone the police. and I felt goosebumps radiating through my body as it did before a long time ago, forced me to remember the silhouetted man from my school 4 years ago. This prompted me to fully study this intruder in case I needed to give a description to the police later. But when I did, I noticed the man was standing there, but his lower half was faded due to the glow of the bonfire, and his solid state was visible in the shadows. It was then that I realized what I was seeing. I mentally tried to calm myself as I fixed my eyes on this ghost who had not broken his glare at me. I muscled up the courage somehow to glare right back at him. I was now locked in a stare down with this figure for what seemed like minutes, but it was more like a few seconds. Just then I heard Sophia, "Hey, did you pee yourself or something?" Her words pierced my ears as I heard my friends laughing and asking why I was just standing there, but my eyes never broke from this figure. Just then, I felt this sudden burst of anger take over me like a fiery wave. As I was flung into the inferno of a bonfire, I felt sweat beating down my cheeks as I glared at this ghost who was glaring back at me. Just then, the ghost sort of smirked at me, as if he was taunting me. This enraged me further, as I could hear footsteps approaching from behind me. It was Kendrick coming to check up on me. As I heard him say, "Dude, what's up?" Just as Kendrick asked that, I bolted. I charged towards the ghost as if we were about to go to war, and the ghost stood for a few seconds, never breaking his glare on me. I felt my heart beating against my chest as each step I took. I became hotter and hotter. I felt like I was a man on fire. As soon as I was a yard or two away from this ghost, he steps into the barn out of sight. "Get back here!" I remembered shouting. I got to the barn doorway where the ghost stood and flung the door open and stood there expecting to see him waiting for me. But nothing. I was staring into pure darkness of the barn. I remember my heart beating hard against my chest. My sweat-drenched shirt clung to my body. Heavy breathing ready to adrenaline coursing through my body as I was ready for a fight that would never come. The next thing I knew, Kendrick, Kane, and Chase ran up to me and grabbed my arm, knocking me out of my daze. My body instantly felt normal, so I no longer felt like I was on fire. Completely confused, I didn't know what came over me. I never felt such anger before, as I am known for my buds as being a very chill guy, but I was truly ready to rip this ghost guy's head off of his body, or lack thereof. My friends figured out that I must have been drunk or high or something to rationalize why I acted like that. They began escorting me back towards our bonfire, where Sophia and Talia was sitting looking at me with concerned eyes. Still trying to rationalize what I've just done as my friends guided me away, I turned my head to look at the barn's door, which was still wide open once more. And I kid you not, deep into the dark barn, I saw him. More specifically, I saw his floating head as his eyes were staring straight at me with a devilish grin. Nobody, just his head. I turned in face front words as we neared the bonfire, and my friends began to calm me down. Sophie spoke up and asked what happened. I remembered saying nothing, as I didn't want to appear crazier than I just made myself out to be. I had to go take a leak, but I figured that I would just hold it until we went back inside together to prevent myself from acting out like that again. We did eventually return back into the house. I took my leak and ended up passing out on the couch. As far-fetched as the story might sound, trust me, I know it does, but it really happened to me. The fact that I was ready to go to blows with a spirit, absolutely insane. Kane eventually confessed to me a few months ago. Yeah, we do keep in touch that I must have taken his LSD blended drink as we were drinking the same brand of bottled beer, and we were just putting it down randomly and picking up on what we thought was our own beer. We knew that must have been the case, because he didn't feel like the effects of the drink that entire night. But when he saw me act like that, he figured that was the reason why. I honestly don't know if I was drunk or tripping off my friend's LSD, but I truly felt that there was a ghost in that barn taunting me, angry that Chase took pieces of his barn to burn in our bonfire. that was his way of getting back at us. That was my assumption, of course. I have a few more encounters that I would like to share in time, but this one still gets to me.
Way back when I first started middle school, it was in a different part of New Jersey, so I didn't really know anyone. I was terrified I wouldn't be able to make any new friends, so imagine my relief when I met Jenny. Jenny isn't her real name, and I'm not going to use any real names in this for reasons that will become obvious. So me and Jenny became fast friends, so we decided to have ourselves a little sleepover at her mom's place. Our parents talked it over and we arranged for me to go home with her on a Friday after school. Then my mom would come get me on the Saturday morning. The Friday arrives, I catch the bus back to Jenny's place with her, and this marks the first time I ever met Jenny's mom. She seemed weird, to say the least. Jenny's dad wasn't in the picture anymore, and I don't think her mom took it very well, because she was the kind of woman who was into crystals and Reiki and all that other spiritual stuff. Maybe she was into that stuff before he left her. The point is, she was that kind of witchy woman, I guess you could say. The evening started off with Jenny's mom being quirky but nice. But at a certain point, she started opening bottles of wine and drinking them super fast. Like even at 13, I'd recognized that there was something not right about the way she drank. But given I was spending most of my time in Jenny's room, I didn't think it'd really matter. Wrong. Because at one point, Jenny's mom walks into her bedroom where we're hanging out and half collapses down onto the bed with a, "What you girls doing?" I don't know if other people can relate to this, but I always used to find drunk adults to be really, really creepy. Seeing how something as simple as a drink could change them so much, and not even for the better. Ugh, it made my skin crawl. But a scary story about, "Oh, poor me, I don't like drunk people," that's not what you guys are here for. So I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear that that's not the scary part. The scary part was when Jenny's mom started channeling spirits. It was legitimately one of the creepiest freaking things I'd ever seen. Seeing this grown woman trying to change her facial features and her voice to make out what the dead were talking through her. I knew it wasn't real. I was 13, not dumb, but seeing her believe it was happening, it was honestly one of the most disturbing things I'd ever seen. She'd pretend to be some long-dead murderer and talk about the murders they committed. Then she'd pretend to be a child cancer patient talking about how scary it was to die so young. Sick stuff like that. And we had to listen to her drone on for an hour or so, telling us all kinds of things that 13-year-old girls should definitely not be hearing. Eventually, she tired herself out and passed out on Jenny's bed. She just excused her mom and we continued the sleepover in the TV room. I was mortified for her, but to Jenny, this was the most normal thing in the world. Then, about 4 or 5 months later, just before summer break, Jenny's mom suffered a complete nervous breakdown and tried to stab her with a bread knife. It was a whole thing in our town, and I don't think I'd ever seen Jenny again. Thankfully, she did end up getting adopted by a distant cousin who lived a few towns over, and so we still got to hang out every once in a while. But her mom was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, and I know that had a really negative effect on her. Me and Jenny lost touch after high school, but if she's out there and she just so happens to be reading this, I hope you're okay. I miss you, and I hope you and your mom are doing just fine now.